The splintered wooden frame of a Butterfield overland stagecoach, its iron-reinforced strongbox containing over 3,200 gold coins and silver ingots worth $94 million, along with sealed leather pouches filled with documents that would rewrite the history of California's most notorious gold rush heist. Before we dive deeper, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story captivates you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I have something even more extraordinary waiting for you. The merciless drought of 2024 will be seared into my memory forever as the season that nearly destroyed everything. My family had fought to preserve over 6 generations. Yet in that moment of absolute desperation, when bankruptcy seemed inevitable and our family's 155-year legacy hung by a thread, the parched earth beneath our feet concealed a secret that would transform our lives in ways beyond our wildest imagination. I'm Isabella Rodriguez-Thornfield. My great-great-grandmother, Clara Elena Rodriguez, established Moonrise Valley Ranch in the sun-baked hills of California's Kern County in 1869, just as the final frantic waves of the gold rush were, transforming our remote valley from a lawless mining camp into a struggling agricultural community. Our 445 vodka spread had been the Rodriguez family's anchor and identity for 155 years. Weathering every conceivable crisis that California's harsh climate and volatile economy could unleash. Clara Elena's story began in 1847 when she arrived in California as a 16-year-old bride, having traveled the treacherous journey from Sonora, Mexico with her new husband Miguel Rodriguez, who had been lured west by tales of gold lying scattered on the ground like pebbles. But Miguel's dreams of instant wealth had evaporated within 6 months, when their mining claim near Angel's Camp proved barren, leaving them with nothing but debts, a failing marriage. In Clara Elena's unwavering determination to create something lasting from the chaos surrounding them. When Miguel abandoned both Clara Elena and California in 1849, heading back to Mexico with another woman and what remained of their savings, Clara Elena faced a choice that would define not just her own fate, but the destiny of 6 generations. Yet unborn, at 19 years old, speaking limited English, with no family within 1,000 miles, and laws that barely recognized a woman's right to own property, she could have followed Miguel back to the familiar poverty of Sonora. Instead, she did something that scandalized the rough mining community of Kern County. She filed a homestead claim in her own name. The legal obstacles Clara Elena faced were staggering. California's property laws in 1849 were a confusing patchwork of Mexican civil law, American territorial statutes, and mining camp customs that often contradicted each other. Most land disputes were settled by force rather than legal precedent, and the idea of a young Mexican woman successfully claiming and defending 160 acres of land seemed impossible to everyone except Clara Elena herself. She spent 3 months learning English from the wife of a sympathetic store owner in the nearest town, studying legal documents by candlelight, and carefully documenting every aspect of her claim to ensure it could withstand the inevitable challenges. The land Clara Elena claimed in 1869 was considered worthless by the departing miners, who had stripped it of surface gold and moved on to more promising territories. 40 acres of rocky hills, sparse grass, and a single natural spring that provided barely enough water for a small cabin and a few chickens. But Clara Elena saw what the gold-crazed miners had missed: rich soil that needed only water and careful cultivation, natural shelter from the valley's brutal winds, and most importantly, a location along what would become a crucial transportation route between the Central Valley and the emerging communities of Southern California. Working 18-hour days with tools she made herself, Clara Elena had hand-cleared rocks from what would become our south pasture, built her first cabin from lumber salvaged from abandoned mining camps, and established the foundation of what would grow into one of Kern County's most respected ranching operations. She kept meticulous journals, written in a mixture of Spanish and English, documenting every decision, every hardship, and every small victory that gradually transformed 40 acres of rocky ground into a viable homestead. A la tierra no menti. She wrote in 1871, "The land does not lie. Men seek gold that disappears, but land fed with sweat and tears will feed families for generations." This philosophy would guide every subsequent generation of our family, shaping our approach to everything from crop selection to business relationships, emphasizing sustainability and long-term thinking over quick profits and short-term gains. Clara Elena's first year on the land nearly killed her. The winter of 1869 to 1870 brought unprecedented snowfall to Kern County, collapsing the roof of her hastily built cabin and forcing her to live in a makeshift shelter constructed from mining equipment and canvas. She survived on dried beans, hardtack, and occasional rabbits she managed to snare, losing nearly 30 pounds and developing a persistent cough that would plague her for the rest of her life. But she also used those brutal winter months to plan improvements to her property, sketching detailed diagrams of irrigation channels, fencing layouts, and building placements that would maximize the efficiency of her limited resources. When spring arrived, Clara Elena began implementing her carefully developed plans with a determination that amazed even the gruff miners who had dismissed her chances of survival. She negotiated with departing prospectors to purchase their abandoned tools and equipment for pennies on the dollar, accumulating picks, shovels, lumber, nails, and even a few head of livestock that miners were abandoning as they moved on to more promising claims. Her ability to speak Spanish proved invaluable in dealing with Mexican miners who were being forced out by discriminatory laws and violence, and many sold her equipment and supplies at fair prices when Anglo merchants were charging exorbitant rates or refusing to sell to her at all. By 1875, Clara Elena had expanded her holdings to 120 acres, purchasing adjacent properties from discouraged miners for sums that seemed enormous at the time, but proved to be brilliant investments. She had established relationships with cattle buyers in Los Angeles, who made the difficult journey to Kern County specifically to purchase her grass-fed beef, knowing they could rely on both the quality of her livestock and the integrity of her business practices. The expansion hadn't come without tremendous personal cost. Clara Elena had miscarried 3 children during those early years, losses she attributed to the physical demands of establishing a ranch single-handedly and the emotional stress of constant financial uncertainty. When she finally gave birth to my great-great-grandfather, Eduardo Rodriguez, in 1876, she was 33 years old and had already established herself as one of the most successful, independent ranchers in Kern County. Clara Elena's success hadn't gone unnoticed, and it hadn't gone unchallenged. Twice during the 1870s, groups of Anglo ranchers had attempted to drive her off her land through intimidation and legal challenges, claiming that Mexican land grants weren't valid under American law. Both times, Clara Elena had successfully defended her property in court, aided by meticulous record-keeping and the testimony of neighbors who respected her integrity and recognized the improvements she had made to what had been worthless mining debris. The most serious challenge came in 1878, when a consortium of wealthy investors from San Francisco attempted to claim mineral rights to her property, arguing that her homestead claim didn't include subsurface rights, and that they were entitled to extract any remaining gold or silver deposits. The legal battle lasted 2 years and nearly bankrupted Clara Elena, but she ultimately prevailed when a federal judge ruled that homestead claims in California included full mineral rights unless explicitly excluded in the original grant. Eduardo grew up understanding that every acre of Moonrise Valley Ranch represented his mother's blood, sweat, and unbreakable will. From the age of 6, he worked alongside Clara Elena, learning not just the practical skills of ranching, but the deeper principles of stewardship and determination that would define the Rodriguez family approach to land management for generations. Clara Elena lived to be 87, working on the ranch until just weeks before her death in 1904. Long enough to see Eduardo expand the operation to 200 acres and establish the Rodriguez name is synonymous with quality and reliability throughout Southern California's agricultural community. Eduardo's contribution to the ranch's development was equally significant, but reflected the changing economic landscape of early 20th century California. Where Clara Elena had focused on survival and basic establishment, Eduardo concentrated on modernization and market expansion. He installed the first telephone line in Kern County in 1895, connecting Moonrise Valley Ranch to buyers and suppliers throughout California. He established the first mechanized grain processing operation in the region, allowing local farmers to mill their crops efficiently rather than transporting raw grain to distant facilities. Most importantly, Eduardo recognized that California's agricultural future lay not in individual family operations competing against each other, but in cooperative networks that could pool resources, share knowledge, and present a united front. In dealing with railroad companies, grain buyers, and other powerful interests that often exploited isolated farmers, he helped establish the Kern County Agricultural Cooperative in 1898, serving as its first president and using his reputation for honesty and fair dealing to attract membership from throughout the region. Eduardo's son, my great-grandfather, Carlos Rodriguez, had inherited both his grandmother's business acumen and her determination to expand thoughtfully rather than recklessly. During the 1920s, when many California ranches were mortgaging everything to chase quick profits and land speculation, Carlos had focused on improving the quality of his existing operations. He had invested in purebred breeding stock, implemented scientific grazing rotation techniques, and established the first mechanized irrigation system in Kern County, using windmills and earthen channels to distribute water from natural springs. Across all 200 acres, Carlos had also made the decision that would prove crucial to our family's long-term survival: diversification. Rather than relying solely on cattle, he had established fruit orchards, vegetable gardens, and hay production, creating multiple revenue streams that could sustain the ranch even when one sector of the agricultural market collapsed. This diversification had saved Moonrise Valley Ranch during the Great Depression, when cattle prices plummeted but demand for fresh produce in Los Angeles remained strong. The 1930s tested every principle Clara Elena had established and every innovation her descendants had implemented. Drought, dust storms, and economic collapse created a perfect storm of challenges that destroyed thousands of agricultural operations throughout California. But Moonrise Valley Ranch not only survived, but actually expanded during this period, as Carlos was able to purchase bankrupt neighboring properties at fraction of their previous value, adding another 125 acres to our holdings and securing crucial water rights that would prove essential in later decades. Carlos's success during the Depression wasn't accidental. It reflected careful planning and conservative financial management that Clara Elena had instilled in her descendants, rather than taking on debt to finance expansion during the prosperous 1920s. Carlos had systematically improved existing operations while building substantial cash reserves. When economic collapse made land and equipment available at drastically reduced prices, Moonrise Valley Ranch was one of the few operations in Kern County with the financial resources to take advantage of these opportunities. My grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez Jr., had earned a degree in agricultural science from UC Berkeley in 1951. Returning to Kern County with revolutionary ideas about soil conservation, pest management, and water efficiency that positioned Moonrise Valley Ranch at the forefront of California's agricultural modernization, Miguel Jr. had expanded the ranch to its current 445 acres during the prosperous 1960s, purchasing the crucial East Ridge property that contained several natural springs and provided access to additional water rights that would prove essential during California's increasingly frequent drought cycles. But Miguel Jr.'s greatest contribution had been his decision to begin the organic certification process in 1978, years before most California ranchers understood the market potential of pesticide-free agriculture. This early adoption of organic practices had positioned Moonrise Valley Ranch to capitalize on the explosion of demand for organic products that began in the 1980s and continued to grow through the following decades. Miguel Jr.'s vision extended beyond simple organic certification. He understood that consumers were increasingly interested in the complete story behind their food, from production methods to environmental impact to the social and economic conditions of agricultural workers. He implemented fair labor practices, decades before they became legally mandated, providing health insurance, education assistance, and profit-sharing programs for ranch employees. He established partnerships with UC Berkeley's Agricultural Extension Program, using Moonrise Valley Ranch as a demonstration site for sustainable farming techniques that were later adopted throughout California. My father, Roberto Rodriguez, had inherited the ranch in 1987 and immediately expanded the organic program, achieving full certification and establishing direct relationships with high-end restaurants throughout California who prize the exceptional quality and reliability of our grass-fed beef, organic vegetables, and heritage fruit varieties. Roberto had also introduced agritourism to Moonrise Valley Ranch, offering educational tours and farm-to-table experiences that provided additional revenue, while sharing our family's story with thousands of visitors who left with a deeper appreciation for sustainable agriculture and the challenges facing family farming operations. Roberto's innovation wasn't limited to marketing and tourism. He also pioneered several agricultural techniques that were later adopted throughout the region. His development of drought-resistant grazing systems allowed Moonrise Valley Ranch to maintain livestock production even during severe water shortages that forced other ranchers to sell their herds. His experiments with heritage crop varieties led to the successful reintroduction of several Mexican heirloom vegetables that had been nearly extinct in California, creating new market opportunities while preserving genetic diversity. When I married James Thornfield in 2003, bringing his family name into our ranching legacy, we had continued the Rodriguez tradition of innovation while honoring the core principles Clara Elena had established 134 years earlier. James, who held a master's degree in sustainable agriculture from UC Davis, had introduced precision farming techniques that maximized yield while minimizing environmental impact. Together, we had established Moonrise Valley Ranch as a leader in carbon-neutral farming practices, generating additional revenue through carbon credit programs while maintaining our commitment to producing the highest quality organic products. Our generation faced challenges that Clara Elena could never have imagined: climate change, international competition, complex environmental regulations, and consumer demands for transparency and social responsibility. But the principles she had established: careful stewardship, long-term thinking, community cooperation, and unwavering determination provided the foundation we needed to address these modern challenges while maintaining the essential character of our family operation. But at the heart of our entire operation, both practically and spiritually, stood the Esperanza well, named by Clara Elena for the Spanish word meaning hope. This hand-dug water source had been the first improvement she made to her homestead. Claim in 1869, located on a natural rise between our main house and Clara Elena's original cabin, which still stood as a testament to her determination and skill. The Esperanza well was an engineering marvel that reflected Clara Elena's background working in her father's stone quarry in Sonora before her marriage brought her to California. Unlike typical frontier wells that were narrow, utilitarian affairs designed merely to reach water, the Esperanza well was a masterpiece of practical architecture, nearly 18 feet in diameter and lined with perfectly fitted granite blocks that Clara Elena had quarried and shaped herself. The well was designed not just to provide water, but to serve as a storage reservoir during California's unpredictable rainfall patterns. The unusual dimensions had puzzled visitors for generations, with Clara Elena's journals providing the only explanation: in el desierto, agua es vida, y la vida requiere abundancia, no simplemente supervivencia. In the desert, water is life, and life requires abundance, not merely survival. The construction of the Esperanza well had taken Clara Elena 18 months, working primarily during the cooler winter months when the physical demands of quarrying and moving massive granite blocks wouldn't overwhelm her limited physical resources. She had designed an ingenious pulley system using lumber and rope purchased from departing miners, allowing her to lower the heavy stone blocks into position with mathematical precision. Each block was individually shaped to fit perfectly with its neighbors, creating a seamless stone lining that had remained structurally sound for over 150 years. For 6 generations of Rodriguez children, the Esperanza well had been the spiritual center of ranch life. Eduardo had learned to swim in its cool depths during the scorching summers of the 1880s. When temperatures in Kern County regularly exceeded 110 degrees, Carlos had proposed to his wife, Maria, beside its stone rim in 1923, under a full moon that gave Moonrise Valley Ranch its name. Miguel Jr. had taught his children about geology and engineering by explaining how Clara Elena had designed the well's innovative stone lining to prevent collapse and contamination. Roberto had continued this tradition, teaching me about our family history while we maintained the wooden windmill that had pumped water from the well's depths for over a century. The Esperanza well had been more than just a water source. It had been a symbol of our family's ability to find abundance even in the harshest conditions. Clara Elena had designed it to serve multiple functions: water storage, community gathering, place, and even emergency shelter during the violent windstorms that occasionally swept through Kern County. The wide stone rim provided seating for ranch hands during break time, and the surrounding area had been landscaped with native plants that created a cool, peaceful oasis in the middle of our working ranch. Family traditions had grown around the well over the decades. Every Rodriguez child learned to swim in its depths. Every major family decision was discussed while sitting on its stone rim. Every marriage proposal in our family history had taken place beside the Esperanza well, continuing a tradition that Clara Elena had started when she used it as the location for her own second wedding to Thomas McKay, an Irish immigrant who became Eduardo's stepfather and a crucial partner in expanding the ranch during its early years. But the Esperanza well had stopped producing water in 1983, the year after I was born. A series of minor earthquakes had apparently shifted the underground rock formations, now cutting off the flow from the aquifer that had fed it for over a century. We had maintained the structure out of respect for its historical significance, and Clara Elena's memory, sealing it with a heavy wooden cover to prevent accidents while preserving the stonework that presented her skill and vision. For decades, the dry well had stood as a monument to our family's past, a reminder of the ingenuity and determination that had sustained us through 155 years of challenges. I would often sit on its stone rim during difficult times, thinking about Clara Elena's courage in claiming this land when she had every reason to give up and return to Mexico. The well had become a place of reflection and connection to our heritage, where each generation of Rodriguez family members had come to make important decisions and find strength in our ancestors' examples. I never imagined that this silent monument to our past would become the key to our future, or that beneath its carefully constructed stone walls lay secrets that would connect our family to one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in California gold rush history. The well that Clara Elena had built to provide hope and abundance for future generations was about to fulfill that promise in ways she could never have envisioned, revealing treasures that would ensure Moonrise Valley Ranch could continue serving as our family's anchor for generations yet to come. As I stood at the edge of the Esperanza well in the summer of 2024, facing the greatest crisis our family had ever encountered, I couldn't have known that Clara Elena's greatest gift to her descendants wasn't the land itself, or even the successful ranch she had built from nothing. It was her unwavering belief that abundance could be found even in the most unlikely places, and that hope, like the well that bore its name, sometimes required digging deeper than anyone thought possible to reach the treasures hidden far below the surface. By March 2024, Moonrise Valley Ranch was operating at the pinnacle of its 155-year history. Our organic certification had opened doors to premium markets throughout California, with restaurants in San Francisco and Los Angeles paying top dollar for our grass-fed beef and heritage vegetables. James and I had successfully implemented precision agriculture techniques that maximize yields while minimizing environmental impact. Our carbon credit programs were generating additional revenue, streams that our ancestors could never have imagined. Our 445 acres were producing at optimal capacity. The South Pasture, where Clara Elena had cleared rocks by hand in 1869, now supported a rotational grazing system that actually improved soil quality while producing some of the finest beef in California. The East Ridge properties that my grandfather, Miguel Jr., had purchased in the 1960s were yielding premium organic almonds and heritage apples that commanded prices 3 times higher than conventional fruit. Our vegetable gardens, utilizing heirloom varieties that Roberto had rescued from near extinction, supplied a network of farm-to-table restaurants whose chefs made special trips to Kern County just to select their produce personally. The ranch employed 12 full-time workers and an additional 8 seasonal employees during harvest periods. It's making us one of the largest employers in our rural community. Following the labor practices that Miguel Jr. had pioneered in the 1970s, we provided health insurance, education assistance, and profit-sharing programs that ensured our workers could afford to live in the same community where they worked. Several of our employees had been with the ranch for over 20 years, representing the kind of institutional knowledge and loyalty that money couldn't buy, but proper treatment could cultivate. Our agritourism program had grown beyond our wildest expectations, with educational tours booked solid 6 months in advance and our farm-to-table dinners consistently selling out within hours of being announced. Visitors came from throughout the United States and even internationally to experience authentic, sustainable agriculture and learn about the Rodriguez family's 155-year journey from Clara Elena's desperate homestead claim to our current status as leaders in organic farming innovation. The financial health of Moonrise Valley Ranch appeared unshakable. We had deliberately avoided the debt-driven expansion that had destroyed many family agricultural operations during the boom years of the early 2000s, instead following Clara Elena's principle of steady, sustainable growth funded by reinvested profits rather than borrowed money. Our diversified revenue streams beef, produce nuts, fruits, agritourism, educational programs, and carbon credits provided stability even when individual market sectors experienced downturns. James and I had even begun planning for the next generation's involvement in the ranch. Our daughter Sophia Elena, named for her great-grandmother, was showing the same fascination with agriculture that had characterized every generation of Rodriguez women. At 15, Sophia was already conducting her own experiments with drought-resistant crop varieties as part of her high school agricultural science program, and several universities had expressed interest in her research on water-efficient irrigation techniques. But beneath this surface prosperity, subtle warning signs were beginning to appear that would soon converge into the greatest crisis our family had ever faced. The first indication of trouble came in February 2024, when I noticed that my mother, Carmen Rodriguez, was showing signs of slowing down that went beyond normal aging. At 73, Mom had been the living embodiment of the Rodriguez family's work ethic and institutional knowledge. She could predict seasonal weather patterns with uncanny accuracy based on subtle changes in wind direction and cloud formations that meteorologists with advanced degrees often missed. She knew the personal preferences of buyers from dozens of restaurants, understanding exactly which chefs preferred their beef aged longer, which wanted vegetables harvested at specific stages of ripeness, and how to time deliveries to coincide with menu changes and seasonal restaurant promotions. Most importantly, Mom was the repository of relationships that had been built over decades of consistent quality and absolute reliability. She could call restaurant owners who had been buying from Moonrise Valley Ranch since the 1980s and negotiate premium prices based on trust that had been earned through 30 years of never missing a delivery, never compromising on quality, and never promising more than we could deliver. These relationships weren't just business connections, they were personal friendships based on mutual respect and shared values about sustainable agriculture and ethical business practices. The subtle changes in Mom's behavior that worried me began as minor incidents that could easily be dismissed as normal forgetfulness. She would occasionally struggle to remember the names of restaurant contacts she had known for decades. She would start to give detailed instructions to ranch workers about tasks they had been performing independently for years, suggesting a loss of confidence in systems that had been functioning smoothly. Most concerning, she began double-checking decisions that she had previously made with absolute certainty, second-guessing herself in ways that were completely uncharacteristic. James and I discussed our concerns privately, but Mom dismissed our worries whenever we tried to address them directly. She insisted that she was simply being more careful as she got older, taking extra time to ensure that decisions were correct, rather than relying on instinct and experience. She pointed out that the ranch was operating more successfully than ever before, argued that our concerns were misplaced given the objective evidence of continued prosperity and growth. But the warning signs became impossible to ignore on February 23, 2024, when Mom suffered what initially appeared to be a minor accident while inspecting fence lines in our north pasture. She had been checking the integrity of posts and wire. That protected our organic vegetable gardens from wildlife, a routine task she had performed thousands of times over the decades. According to the ranch hand who found her, Mom had apparently become disoriented while walking along a familiar section of fence, losing her bearings in an area she could normally navigate blindfolded. When Carlos Mendoza, our most experienced employee, found Mom sitting beside the fence line, looking confused and unable to explain how she had gotten there, he immediately drove her back to the main house and called me from the fields. Mom insisted that she had simply sat down to rest and lost track of time. But Carlos privately told me that she had seemed genuinely surprised to see him, as if she couldn't remember leaving the house or why she was in the north pasture at all. James and I insisted that Mom see Dr. Patricia Hernandez, our family physician, for a comprehensive examination. Dr. Hernandez had known our family for 15 years and was familiar with Mom's typically sharp mental acuity and physical resilience. After conducting a thorough evaluation, including cognitive assessment tests, blood work, and brain imaging, Dr. Hernandez delivered news that shattered our sense of security and forced us to confront a crisis we had never anticipated. Carmen is showing early signs of dementia, Dr. Hernandez explained during a family meeting in her office on March 15, 2024. The specific type and progression rate are difficult to predict, but the symptoms: she's experiencing memory lapses, disorientation, difficulty with familiar tasks are consistent with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis hit our family like a physical blow. Mom had always been the strongest, most mentally sharp person any of us knew. She could recite ranch financial data from decades past, remember the birth dates of employees' children, and maintain complex mental calculations about crop rotations, market prices, and seasonal planning, without ever writing anything down. The idea that this incredible mind was beginning to fail seemed impossible to accept. Dr. Hernandez explained that dementia was progressive and incurable, but that early intervention could slow its advancement and help maintain Mom's quality of life for as long as possible. The recommended treatment plan included expensive medications, specialized therapy programs, and potentially costly modifications to our home and daily routines to ensure Mom's safety as her condition progressed. But beyond the emotional devastation of watching Mom's gradual decline, the practical implications for Moonrise Valley Ranch were staggering. Mom wasn't just a beloved family member. She was the operational heart of our business. She maintained relationships with buyers that generated over 60% of our revenue. She made daily decisions about production, pricing, and logistics. That kept our complex agricultural operation running smoothly. Most critically, she possessed decades of accumulated knowledge about our land, our crops, and our markets that existed nowhere else and couldn't be easily transferred or replicated. The realization that we were losing Mom's expertise and institutional knowledge at the peak of our ranch's success created a leadership vacuum that James and I were not prepared to fill. Despite my 15 years of involvement in ranch management and James's advanced degrees in sustainable agriculture, of us possessed the depth of practical experience and relationship building that had made Mom such an effective leader. We understood the technical aspects of our operation, but Mom understood the human and market dynamics that converted technical excellence into business success. The first indication of how devastating Mom's condition would be for our business came in late March when she forgot about a crucial delivery to Chez Laurent, one of our most important restaurant customers in San Francisco. Chef Laurent Dubois had been buying from Moonrise Valley Ranch for 12 years, and Mom had always personally coordinated his orders to ensure they arrived exactly when he needed them for his Thursday evening menu preparation. When Chef Dubois called on Thursday afternoon to inquire about his missing delivery, Mom was genuinely confused, insisting that she had no record of any order and questioning whether he had contacted the correct ranch. The conversation became increasingly uncomfortable as Chef Dubois, who had never experienced a missed delivery from us in 12 years, struggled to understand how such a reliable supplier could suddenly become unreliable without explanation. James and I were able to salvage the situation by driving to San Francisco immediately with an emergency delivery. But the incident forced Chef Dubois to modify his menu at the last minute and created exactly the kind of unreliability that could destroyed relationships we had spent decades building. More troubling, when we reviewed Mom's order records, we discovered that she had written down Chef Dubois's order correctly, but had somehow forgotten to add it to our delivery schedule, suggesting that her organizational systems were beginning to fail in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. The incident with Chef Dubois was followed by a series of smaller but equally concerning lapses. Mom began quoting outdated prices to potential customers, not realizing that costs for feed, labor, and transportation had increased significantly over the past year. She scheduled conflicting appointments for agritourism tours, creating confusion and disappointment for visitors who had traveled hundreds of miles to experience our programs. Most seriously, she began giving contradictory instructions to ranch workers about crop management, creating inefficiencies and potential safety hazards that could affect both our productivity and our organic certification. By April 2024, it had become clear that Mom could no longer handle the complex responsibilities she had managed effortlessly for decades. The transition of her duties to James and me was proving far more difficult than we had anticipated, requiring us to learn not just the mechanical aspects of her job, but the subtle interpersonal skills and market knowledge that she had developed over 30 years of experience. The emotional toll of watching Mom's decline was compounded by the practical challenges of maintaining business, relationships while dealing with our own grief and uncertainty. Several longtime customers began expressing concerns about changes in our communication patterns and delivery schedules, and we found ourselves constantly explaining and apologizing for inconsistencies that never would have occurred under Mom's management. But Mom's health crisis, devastating as it was, represented only the beginning of a series of cascading disasters that would soon threaten everything our family had built over 155 years. The second crisis emerged in early May, when California's drought conditions, which had been developing gradually over the previous 2 years, suddenly accelerated into what meteorologists were calling the worst water shortage in the state's recorded history. The 2024 drought was unprecedented in both its severity and its rapid onset. Sierra Nevada snowpack, which typically provided water for California's Central Valley throughout the summer growing season, was measuring at only 12% of normal levels. Rainfall in Kern County had been virtually non-existent since December, and underground aquifer levels were dropping at rates that alarmed even experienced water management officials. For most agricultural operations in California, severe drought meant difficult choices about which crops to maintain and which to abandon. But for organic operations like Moonrise Valley Ranch, the challenges were exponentially more complex. Our organic certification required us to use only approved irrigation water sources and prohibited the use of many drought-resistant chemicals that conventional farms could employ. More critically, our premium market positioning depended on maintaining consistent quality and reliable supply, meaning that we couldn't simply reduce production without risking long-term relationships with high-end customers. The first indication of how severely the drought would affect our operation came when our primary irrigation wells began showing signs of declining output. The modern wells that had replaced the Esperanza wells, our main water sources, were drilled to access deep aquifers that had been reliable for decades. But by May 2024, these wells were requiring longer pumping cycles to produce the same amount of water. And the water they produced showed increasing mineral concentrations that suggested we were approaching the limits of the aquifer's capacity. James immediately implemented water conservation measures that we had developed during previous drought years. But the 2024 conditions were beyond anything our contingency plans had anticipated. Drip irrigation systems that had previously provided efficient water distribution were struggling to maintain adequate moisture levels. Mulching and soil preparation techniques that had worked during moderate drought years were proving insufficient. Against the combination of record high temperatures and virtually non-existent rainfall, our livestock operation faced even more immediate challenges. Cattle require substantial amounts of water for drinking, and the natural springs and stock ponds that had traditionally provided this water were drying up at alarming rates. The East Ridge Springs, that had been one of the primary reasons my grandfather had purchased that property in the 1960s, were producing less than 30% of their normal flow, forcing us to transport water to outlying pastures using tank trucks that consumed enormous amounts of diesel fuel while providing only temporary solutions. The financial implications of the drought were staggering. Our water costs, which had traditionally been negligible due to our reliance on wells and natural sources, suddenly became one of our largest operating expenses. We were forced to purchase water from municipal sources at premium prices, and even that water required careful rationing to ensure we could maintain our most critical operations. More troubling was the impact on our crop yields and quality. Organic vegetables that commanded premium prices, specifically because of their superior tastes and nutritional content, were showing stress. Symptoms that affected both their appearance and their flavor. Restaurant customers who paid extra for Moonrise Valley Ranch produce because of its exceptional quality began questioning whether the vegetables they were receiving met their standards. Our heritage fruit trees, which had been producing exceptional crops for decades, began showing signs of severe water stress that threatened not just the current year's harvest, but the long-term health of the trees themselves. Almond trees that represented decades of careful cultivation and substantial investment were dropping leaves and showing bark damage that could take years to recover from, even if normal rainfall patterns returned. But the most serious threat from the drought was to our organic certification itself. The strict standards required for organic agriculture include specific requirements for soil health, pest management, and plant nutrition that become increasingly difficult to maintain under severe drought conditions. If we were forced to use non-approved irrigation sources or employ emergency measures that violated organic standards, we could lose the certification that formed the foundation of our market positioning and premium pricing. The combination of Mom's deteriorating health and the escalating drought crisis created a perfect storm of challenges that began to overwhelm our family's ability to respond effectively. James and I found ourselves working 18-hour days, trying to manage both the immediate practical demands of keeping the ranch operational and the long-term strategic decisions required to navigate unprecedented challenges. The stress began, affecting every aspect of our lives. James, who had always been methodical and calm under pressure, became increasingly short-tempered and prone to making hasty decisions that he later regretted. I found myself lying awake at night running through endless scenarios, trying to identify solutions to problems that seemed to multiply faster than we could address them. Our 15-year-old daughter, Sophia, who had always been excited about eventually joining the family business, began questioning whether Moonrise Valley Ranch would even exist by the time she was old enough to take on significant responsibilities. The uncertainty about our future was affecting her academic performance and her relationships with friends. As she struggled to maintain normal teenage activities while watching her family face an existential crisis, the ranch workers who had been with us for years began expressing private concerns about job security. We could see the anxiety in their faces as they watched us scramble to address challenges that previous generations of Rodriguez family members had always handled with confidence and competence. The sense of stability and continuity that had defined Moonrise Valley Ranch for 155 years was beginning to crack under pressures that seemed beyond our ability to control. By June 2024, the financial strain was becoming unsustainable. The combination of reduced revenues due to declining crop yields and increased expenses from water purchases, emergency equipment rentals, and Mom's medical care was depleting our cash reserves at an alarming rate. Conservative financial management that had sustained our family through previous crises was proving inadequate against the unprecedented scope of the current challenges. James and I began having difficult conversations about contingency plans that our family had never previously considered. For the first time in 155 years, the possibility of selling portions of Moonrise Valley Ranch was becoming a realistic option rather than an unthinkable betrayal of our heritage. The land that Clara Elena had fought to claim and defend, that 6 generations of Rodriguez family members had improved and expanded. might need to be sacrificed to ensure the survival of what remained. The emotional weight of these discussions was crushing. Every acre of our ranch represented not just financial value, but family history and personal identity that couldn't be measured in dollars. The idea of breaking up the integrated agricultural, a system that our ancestors had spent over a century developing, felt like admitting defeat and abandoning everything they had worked to achieve. But practical reality was beginning to override emotional attachment. Our accountant, who had managed the ranch's finances for 20 years, delivered increasingly grim assessments of our cash flow projections and debt capacity. Bank officials who had previously approved loans based on our stellar credit history and strong asset base were now expressing concerns about our ability to service additional debt given the uncertain agricultural conditions and market volatility. The crisis deepened in early July when our insurance company informed us that our agricultural policy would not be renewed at the previous rates due to increased wildfire risk and water shortage concerns in Kern County. The new premium quotes were nearly 3 times higher than our previous costs, adding another substantial expense to our already strained budget. As July progressed with no relief from the drought and no improvement in Mom's condition, James and I were forced to acknowledge that we faced choices that could fundamentally alter the character and future of Moonrise Valley Ranch. The land that had sustained our family for 155 years might not be able to sustain us through the current crisis without sacrifices that would change everything our ancestors had built. The weight of 6 generations of expectations and the knowledge that our decisions would affect not just our own family but also the 12 employees who depended on us for their livelihoods created pressure that seemed almost unbearable. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered Clara Elena's journals and her repeated emphasis on resourcefulness, adaptability, and the belief that solutions could be found even in the most impossible circumstances. As I stood at the edge of the dry Esperanza during those hot July evenings, I found myself wondering if our ancestors had faced similar moments of desperation and somehow found ways to persevere that we couldn't yet see. The well that had provided hope and abundance for 6 generations sat silent and empty. But perhaps its greatest gift to our family was yet to be revealed. The second week of July 2024 brought a heat wave that shattered temperature records across California's Central Valley. For 7 consecutive days, temperatures in Kern County exceeded 118 degrees Fahrenheit, creating conditions so extreme that even our drought-adapted native plants began showing signs of severe stress. The relentless heat accelerated evaporation from our already depleted water sources and pushed our irrigation systems beyond their designed capacity. Just when our crops needed maximum protection, it was during this brutal heat wave, on July 16th at 2:47 p.m., that our main irrigation pump suffered a catastrophic failure that would transform our water crisis from a manageable challenge into an existential threat to Moonrise Valley Ranch's survival. I was in the ranch office, struggling to balance our books while monitoring Mom's condition, when Carlos Mendoza burst through the door with an expression of panic I had never seen on his weathered face in 23 years of working together. "Isabella, you need to come to the pump house immediately," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "The main pump just exploded. There's metal everywhere and water is spraying in all directions. Shut off the main valve, but we've lost pressure to the entire south and west irrigation zones." I ran the quarter-mile to the pump house, my heart pounding as I comprehended the implications of what Carlos was describing. The main irrigation pump was a massive Grundfos unit that had been installed in 2018 at a cost of $47,000. It's designed to move 850 gallons per minute from our primary well 2 distribution points throughout the ranch. This pump was the heart of our irrigation system, responsible for delivering water to over 200 acres of our most valuable crops. The scene at the pump house was devastating. The pump's cast iron housing had literally exploded, sending sharp metal fragments throughout the small building and embedding shrapnel in the concrete walls. The main drive shaft, which should have been spinning smoothly inside the pump housing, was twisted and bent at an impossible angle. Hydraulic fluid, cooling water, and metal debris covered every surface, creating a scene that looked more like a bombing site than a mechanical failure. James arrived moments after me, took one look at the destruction, and immediately began calculating the implications. "This isn't just a pump replacement," he said grimly, kneeling to examine the twisted shaft and destroyed impeller. "The explosion sent metal fragments through the entire distribution system. We're going to need to flush and inspect every line, replace contaminated filters, and probably rebuild several valve assemblies." Carlos, who had 40 years of experience maintaining agricultural equipment, shook his head as he surveyed the damage. "I've never seen a pump failure this violent," he said. "It's like something caused the impeller to seize while running at full speed. The torque forces literally tore the housing apart. The immediate priority was protecting our crops from the 118-degree heat, without the benefit of our primary irrigation system." James organized our crew to begin emergency hand watering of our most valuable plants using portable pumps and hoses, a labor-intensive process that could only provide minimal protection for a small fraction of our irrigated acreage. Meanwhile, I began making phone calls to equipment suppliers, trying to locate a replacement pump that could be delivered and installed before our crops suffered irreversible damage. The quotes I received from equipment dealers were staggering. A replacement pump identical to our destroyed unit would cost $52,000. But none were available for immediate delivery due to high demand caused by drought conditions throughout California. The earliest delivery date was 3 weeks away, far too long to keep our crops alive during the ongoing heat wave. Expedited shipping could reduce the wait to 10 days, but would add another $8,000 to the cost. Even more expensive was the damage to our distribution system. The metal fragments from the pump explosion had contaminated our entire network of underground pipes, valves, and filters. A specialist from Fresno who arrived the next day estimated that flushing and repairing the contaminated system would cost an additional $67,000, bringing the total repair bill to $127,000 before including labor and the cost of temporary irrigation measures. Our insurance policy covered mechanical failures, but the adjuster who inspected the damage classified the pump explosion as normal wear and tear, rather than a covered catastrophe. The adjuster, a young man from Los Angeles, who clearly had never worked on a ranch, argued that agricultural equipment was expected to fail periodically and that our policy was designed to cover weather-related damage, not maintenance issues. This pump was only 6 years old and had been properly maintained according to manufacturer specifications. I argued during a heated phone conversation with the insurance company's claims department. Pumps don't normally explode with enough force to embed metal fragments in concrete walls. This was clearly a manufacturing defect or catastrophic failure that should be covered under our policy. But the insurance company's position was inflexible. It classified the incident as expected equipment deterioration and denied our claim entirely. After paying premiums for 15 years without filing a single claim, we were told that we would receive no assistance for a catastrophic failure that threatened the survival of our family business. While we struggled to find solutions to the irrigation crisis, the drought conditions continued to worsen. The National Weather Service issued its first exceptional drought warning for Kern County, the most severe classification on their drought monitoring scale. Water restrictions were implemented throughout the region, limiting agricultural use to emergency crop protection only. Even if we could repair our irrigation system, we would face severe limits on the amount of water we could legally use. The combination of equipment failure and water restrictions created impossible choices about which crops to save and which to abandon. Our heritage tomatoes, which commanded premium prices from high-end restaurants, required consistent moisture to maintain their exceptional flavor and texture. Our almond trees, representing decades of investment and careful cultivation, would suffer permanent damage if they didn't receive adequate water during the critical summer growing period. Our organic vegetable gardens, which supplied farm-to-table restaurants throughout California, would be destroyed within days without immediate irrigation. James and I worked frantically to prioritize our limited resources, making heartbreaking decisions about which portions of our ranch to sacrifice in hopes of saving the rest. We decided to focus our emergency irrigation efforts on the almond trees and our most valuable vegetable crops, while allowing our pasture grasses and hay fields to go dormant. This strategy would preserve our highest value assets, but would eliminate feed for our cattle, forcing us to purchase expensive hay from other sources or reduce our herd size. The cattle situation created its own cascade of problems. Our grass-fed beef operation depended on maintaining cattle on pasture rather than in feedlots, both for the superior quality of the meat and for our organic certification. But with our pastures drying up and hay prices skyrocketing due to widespread drought, we faced the choice of either spending unsustainable amounts on purchased feed or selling our breeding stock at distressed prices during a market flooded with cattle from other drought-stricken operations. By the end of July, our cash flow projections showed that we were burning through our savings at a rate that would exhaust our reserves within 3 months. The combination of reduced revenues from crop losses, increased expenses for emergency, irrigation, and purchased feed, Mom's escalating medical costs, and the massive irrigation system repair, Bill was consuming resources faster than our remaining operations could generate income. The stress was taking a devastating toll on our family relationships. James, who had always been my calm, methodical partner in both marriage and business, became increasingly irritable and prone to angry outbursts over minor issues. The pressure of making life-or-death decisions about our crops every day, combined with watching our financial resources disappear, was pushing him beyond his emotional limits. Our daughter Sophia, who had been excited about her agricultural science projects at the beginning of the summer, became withdrawn and anxious as she watched her parents struggle with problems that seemed beyond solution. She stopped working on her drought-resistant crop experiments, telling me that there was no point in developing new agricultural techniques if we wouldn't have a ranch to implement them on. Mom's condition continued to deteriorate, adding emotional anguish to our practical challenges. She had good days when she seemed almost like her old self, offering suggestions about crop management and customer relationships with her traditional wisdom and insight. But she also had increasingly frequent bad days when she couldn't remember basic facts about the ranch, or became confused about where she was and what year it was. The worst part was watching Mom's frustration with her own declining abilities. She knew that something was wrong, that her memory and judgment weren't functioning normally, but she couldn't understand why or accept that the condition was progressive and incurable. During her lucid moments, she would apologize repeatedly for forgetting important details or making mistakes, breaking our hearts with her awareness of how much we were losing as her abilities faded. On August 3rd, Mom wandered away from the house while James and I were dealing with another irrigation emergency in the far pastures. Sophia found her 3 hours later, sitting beside the dry Esperanza well, completely disoriented and unable to explain how she had gotten there or why she had left the house. The incident forced us to acknowledge that Mom could no longer be left alone, requiring us to hire a full-time caregiver at a cost of $4,200 per month that our strained budget could barely accommodate. Caregiver, a compassionate woman named Elena Vasquez, who specialized in dementia patients, helped stabilize Mom's daily routine and provided the professional care she needed. But her presence also served as a constant reminder of how much our family situation had changed and how much worse it was likely to become as Mom's condition progressed. Meanwhile, our irrigation system repairs were proving even more complex and expensive than initially estimated. When contractors began excavating to reach contaminated underground pipes, they discovered that the pump explosion had caused more extensive damage than anyone had realized. Metal fragments had traveled through the main distribution line for over 400 feet, requiring complete replacement of that section rather than simple cleaning and repair. The revised repair estimate reached $147,000, and the contractor warned that additional problems might be discovered as work progressed. Each day of delay meant more crop losses and increased the risk that we would miss the narrow window for saving our almond trees and other perennial crops. We faced the agonizing choice of committing to massive repair costs without knowing if additional problems would push the final bill even higher. Our bank, which had been supportive during previous challenges, began expressing concerns about our ability to service additional debt given the uncertain agricultural conditions and our deteriorating cash flow, loan officer who had approved. Our equipment purchases for over a decade started, requesting additional documentation and collateral for what had previously been routine credit line extensions. I understand that you're facing exceptional circumstances, explained David Martinez, our longtime banking representative, during an uncomfortable meeting in his Bakersfield office. But bank regulations require us to evaluate credit risk based on current financial performance, not historical relationships. Your debt-to-asset ratio has deteriorated significantly, and your cash flow projections don't support the additional borrowing you're requesting. The bank's position forced us to confront the possibility that we might need to use our land as collateral for the irrigation system repairs, putting the ranch itself at risk if we couldn't restore profitability quickly enough to service the debt. For a family that had never borrowed against our core property in 155 years of operation, the idea of mortgaging Clara Elena's legacy felt like a fundamental betrayal of everything our ancestors had worked to achieve. As August progressed, with no relief from the drought and mounting equipment problems, we faced additional crises that seemed to emerge faster than we could address them. Our backup generator, which provided power for essential systems during the frequent electrical outages caused by grid strain from air conditioning demand, failed during a particularly critical period when we were running emergency irrigation pumps around the clock. The generator failure occurred at 3 a.m. on August 12th, shutting down our temporary irrigation systems just as we were making progress on saving our most valuable crops. By the time we discovered the problem and arranged for a replacement generator, 12 hours of 115-degree heat had undone weeks of careful water management, causing severe damage to plants we had thought were stabilizing. Our veterinary bills also began escalating as heat stress and poor nutrition from reduced pasture quality affected our livestock. Several cattle developed heat-related illnesses that required expensive treatment, and our breeding program suffered. Setbacks when heat stress caused reproductive problems in our prize breeding stock. The veterinarian bills, combined with increased feed costs and reduced milk production from our dairy operation, turned our normally profitable livestock enterprise into another drain on our deteriorating finances. The emotional toll of watching 155 years of family legacy crumble was becoming unbearable. I found myself crying unexpectedly during routine conversations with employees or customers, overwhelmed by the gap between the confident ranch manager I needed to be and the desperate woman I was becoming. Sleep became elusive as my mind raced through endless scenarios, searching for solutions that seemed to move further away each day. James began talking about strategic downsizing, a euphemism for selling portions of the ranch to generate cash. For repairs and debt service, conversations were agonizing. As we tried to identify which parcels of land we could sacrifice while maintaining a viable agricultural operation, every acre we considered selling had been improved by generations of our family and represented not just financial value, but irreplaceable heritage and identity. The East Ridge property, which contained our remaining natural springs and had been purchased by my grandfather in the 1960s, emerged as the most likely candidate for sale. Land could be developed for residential use, making it attractive. Two developers who would pay premium prices for the scenic views and proximity to natural water sources. The sale would generate enough cash to repair our irrigation system and provide working capital to survive the current crisis. But selling the East Ridge would mean losing our most reliable water sources and compromising our ability. Future droughts would also mean allowing development in an area that had been preserved as natural habitat for over 60 years, destroying ecosystem relationships that our family had carefully maintained as part of our commitment to environmental stewardship. The discussions about selling land became increasingly heated as James and I struggled with decisions that pitted short-term survival against long-term sustainability. We both understood the practical necessity of generating cash to save the ranch, but we also felt the weight of betraying our ancestors' sacrifices and our own children's inheritance. By late August, our situation had deteriorated to the point where we were having daily family meetings to discuss which bills to pay and which to defer, trying to balance immediate survival needs against long-term relationships with suppliers and service providers. The ranch that had been a source of pride and stability for 6 generations was becoming a source of constant anxiety and impossible choices. It was during one of these agonizing family meetings, on August 28, 2024, that I received a phone call that would introduce a completely unexpected perspective on our crisis and set in motion the discovery that would transform our understanding of both our land and our family's destiny. But at that moment, as I answered the phone while reviewing bills we couldn't pay and discussing land we might have to sell, I had no idea that salvation might be hidden beneath our feet, waiting in the depths of the dry well where Clara Elena had once found hope and abundance for her descendants. The phone call that would change everything came at 7:23 p.m. on August 28th. Just as James and I were concluding another devastating family meeting about our deteriorating financial situation, we'd spent 2 hours reviewing bills we couldn't pay, discussing which equipment repairs we could delay, and agonizing over the preliminary real estate assessments for the East Ridge property that we were increasingly certain we would have to sell. Sophia had left the meeting in tears after we explained that her college fund might need to be used to keep the ranch operational through the winter. Mom sat quietly in her chair, occasionally asking questions that revealed how little she understood about the crisis threatening to destroy everything her mother and grandmother had built, the weight of 6 generations of expectations, and the knowledge that our decisions would affect not just our family, but also our 12 employees and their families, felt crushing. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer it, exhausted by the constant stream of calls from creditors, equipment suppliers, and service providers wanting to know when they could expect payment. But the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Sacramento area code, and something made me pick up. Isabella, says Dr. Alejandra Morales from the California State Archaeological Survey Division. I hope I'm not calling too late. The voice was warm but professional, with a slight accent that suggested Spanish was her first language. I had never heard of Dr. Morales, or the Archaeological Survey Division, and couldn't imagine why a state archaeologist would be calling Moonrise Valley Ranch. I'm sorry, Dr. Morales, but I think you may have the wrong number. We're a working ranch, not an archaeological site. Actually, I believe I have exactly the right number, she replied, with a note of excitement in her voice. I've been conducting research on undocumented transportation routes during California's gold rush period, and your property appears to be located at a crucial intersection point that we've been trying to identify for over 3 years. James looked up from the financial documents he was reviewing, his expression shifting from exhaustion to curiosity as he listened to my side of the conversation. Sophia, who had been about to leave for her room, paused at the doorway. I'm afraid I don't understand, I said. Our family has owned this land since 1869, and we've never found any evidence of gold rush activity. This area was considered worthless mining territory when my great-grandmother claimed it. That's exactly what makes it so interesting, Dr. Morales explained. We've been studying the logistical networks that supported gold mining operations, particularly the lesser-known transportation routes that were kept secret to protect valuable shipments from robbery. Based on geographical analysis and recently discovered historical documents, we believe your property may have been the location of a clandestine way station operated by the Butterfield Overland Mail Company. The name Butterfield Overland sparked a memory from my high school California history classes, but I couldn't recall specific details about their operations in Kern County. Even if that were true, Dr. Morales, I'm not sure how it would be relevant to our current situation. We're facing some serious challenges right now, and historical research isn't really our priority. I understand completely, she said, her tone becoming more serious. But there's something else you should know. I've secured a federal grant to investigate potential archaeological sites related to gold rush transportation networks. If your property contains evidence of a Butterfield way station, the investigation could qualify for historical preservation funding that might be ... substantial. The word substantial caught my attention immediately. Any source of funding, no matter how unlikely, deserved investigation given our desperate financial situation. What kind of investigation are we talking about, and what would it mean for our ranch operations? That's what I'd like to discuss with you in person, Dr. Morales replied. I have geological surveys, historical maps, and recently discovered. Correspondence that I believe will be very interesting to your family. Would it be possible for me to visit your ranch tomorrow? I could explain everything in detail and show you why I think your property might be far more historically significant than anyone has realized. James was making encouraging gestures, clearly interested in any potential source of funding or assistance. Sophia had returned to the table, drawn by the possibility that someone might have solutions rather than more problems. Even Mom seemed more alert, perhaps responding to the mention of historical research that might reveal new information about the land she had known her entire life. Dr. Morales, we'd be happy to meet with you, I said, making the decision that would set in motion the most extraordinary discovery in our family's 155-year history. How about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and give you directions to the ranch? After ending the call, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. James was already researching the Butterfield Overland Mail Company on his laptop, discovering that they had operated extensive networks throughout California during the 1850s and 1860s, often using secret routes to transport gold and other valuables. Look at this, James said, reading from a Wikipedia article about Butterfield operations. They establish way stations every 12 to 15 miles along their routes, providing fresh horses, food, and shelter for drivers and passengers. The stations were often located at natural water sources and were sometimes kept secret to protect valuable shipments from bandits. Sophia, whose interest in history had been dormant since elementary school, suddenly became engaged by the possibility that our family's land might have played a role in California's most famous historical period. If there really was a way station here, would there be artifacts buried underground? Maybe that's why the Esperanza well is so much bigger than normal. Wells, her observation was surprisingly insightful. The Esperanza well's unusual dimensions had always been explained by Clara Elena's journals as necessary for water storage during drought years. But none of us had ever questioned why a 19-year-old woman with limited resources would undertake the enormous task of excavating and lining an 18-foot diameter well when a much smaller structure would have served her basic needs. We'll find out tomorrow, I said, feeling a spark of hope that had been absent for months. Dr. Morales said she has historical documents and surveys that she wants to show us. Maybe there's more to our land's history than we've ever known. Dr. Alejandra Morales arrived at Moonrise Valley Ranch the next morning, driving a white SUV loaded with surveying equipment, boxes of historical documents, and what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar units. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with short gray hair and intense brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of our property as she parked near the main house. Her appearance was professionally casual, khaki pants, hiking boots, and a field vest covered with pockets containing various instruments and measuring devices, but her demeanor was that of someone who had made significant discoveries before and was accustomed to dealing with landowners who might be skeptical of archaeological theories. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice," she said as James and I welcomed her to our kitchen table. "I know you're dealing with serious challenges right now. I want to be completely honest about both the potential benefits and the requirements of what I'm proposing." Leather portfolio and spread out a collection of maps, photographs, and documents that immediately captured our attention. The centerpiece was a hand-drawn map dated 1863 that showed transportation routes throughout Kern County, with several locations marked as confidential stations. Along what appeared to be a route passing directly through our property, this map was discovered last year in the estate of a deceased Butterfield Overland employee, Dr. Morales explained. It shows a previously unknown network of secret way stations that were used to transport high-value shipments between Los Angeles and Northern California goldfields. Your property is marked here as Station 7 Esperanza Springs. The name Esperanza Springs sent chills down my spine. Clara Elena had named our well Esperanza for the Spanish word meaning hope, but none of her journals mentioned why she had chosen that specific name or whether it had any historical significance. Are you suggesting that Clara Elena knew about this historical connection when she named the well? I asked. That's one possibility, Dr. Morales replied. But there's another explanation that might be even more significant. Based on the geological surveys I've conducted and the historical timeline, I believe your ancestor may have built her well on the site of an existing Butterfield way station. The unusual dimensions and sophisticated stone construction suggest that she may have been adapting or expanding a structure that was already present. James leaned forward, studying the map more carefully. What happened to these way stations? Why aren't they documented in standard historical records? That's where the story becomes really interesting, Dr. Morales said, pulling out another. A set of documents? The Butterfield Overland Mail Company ceased operations in 1861 when the Civil War disrupted their funding and the transcontinental telegraph made their communication services obsolete. But some of their routes continued to be used by independent freight companies and gold transportation services until the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. She showed us a series of photographs from other confirmed way station sites throughout California. The similarities to our Esperanza well were unmistakable, circular stone-lined structures much larger than typical frontier wells, designed to serve multiple functions beyond simple water access. What I find most intriguing about your site, Dr. Morales continued, is that it was apparently still active in 1868, just 1 year before your ancestor claimed the land. There are records of a freight company called Sierra Transport operating secret routes through this area, carrying gold shipments from mines in the southern Sierra Nevada to buyers in Los Angeles. Sophia, who had been listening intently to the conversation, suddenly spoke up. What happened to Sierra Transport? Why did they stop using the station? Dr. Morales' expression became more serious. That's where the historical record becomes very mysterious. Sierra Transport ceased operations abruptly in late 1868, and there are indications that their final shipment, substantial cargo of gold coins and silver ingots, worth approximately $2.3 million in 1868. Currency disappeared without explanation. The figure she mentioned was staggering. Even in $1,868, $2.3 million represented an enormous fortune. In modern currency, accounting for both inflation and the increased value of precious metals, such a shipment would be worth well over $100 million. You're talking about a lost treasure, James said, his voice reflecting the mixture of excitement and skepticism that we all felt. Are you suggesting that this missing shipment might be somewhere on our property? I'm suggesting that the circumstances surrounding Sierra Transport's disappearance and the timing of your ancestor's land claim create an intriguing historical puzzle, Dr. Morales replied carefully. The federal grant I've secured provides funding to investigate exactly these kinds of questions, using non-invasive archaeological techniques. She pulled out a tablet computer and showed us ground-penetrating radar images from other way station sites. The technology could reveal buried structures, metal objects, and soil disturbances without requiring excavation. Providing a way to investigate our property's history, James was making encouraging gestures, clearly interested in any potential source of funding or assistance. Sophia had returned to the table, drawn by the possibility that someone might have solutions rather than more problems. Even Mom seemed more alert, perhaps responding to the mention of historical research that might reveal new information about the land she had known her entire life. Dr. Morales, we'd be happy to meet with you, I said, making the decision that would set in motion the most extraordinary discovery in our family's 155-year history. How about 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and give you directions to the ranch? After ending the call, I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. James was already researching the Butterfield Overland Mail Company on his laptop, discovering that they had operated extensive networks throughout California during the 1850s and 1860s, often using secret routes to transport gold and other valuables. Look at this, James said, reading from a Wikipedia article about Butterfield operations. They established way stations every 12 to 15 miles along their routes, providing fresh horses, food, and shelter for drivers and passengers. The stations were often located at natural water sources and were sometimes kept secret to protect valuable shipments from bandits. Sophia, whose interest in history had been dormant since elementary school, suddenly became engaged by the possibility that our family's land might have played a role in California's most famous historical period. If there really was a way station here, Mom, who had been sitting quietly throughout the presentation, suddenly spoke up with unexpected clarity. Clara Elena wrote about finding strange objects when she was digging the well. I remember reading about metal pieces and old leather that she couldn't identify. This was news to all of us. Mom's memory had been so unreliable lately that we weren't sure whether to trust this recollection. But Dr. Morales immediately became very interested. "Do you still have Clara Elena's journals?" she asked. "Any contemporary descriptions of artifacts found during construction could be extremely valuable. For understanding what we might discover, I retrieved the collection of leather-bound journals that had been carefully preserved in our family for over 150 years. Clara Elena had written in a mixture of Spanish and English, documenting everything from weather patterns to business transactions. With meticulous detail that had helped our family understand her methods and philosophy, Dr. Morales examined the journals with the careful attention of someone accustomed to working with historical documents. She photographed several pages with a specialized camera, paying particular attention to entries from 1869 and 1870, when Clara Elena was constructing the well. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry dated September 1869, "Clara Elena writes about finding piezas de hierro, oxidado, huayquero, viejo, cuno, entiendo, rusty iron pieces, and old leather that she doesn't understand. She mentions removing these objects and setting them aside, but there's no indication of what she did with them afterward." The discovery of this reference in Clara Elena's journals transformed the conversation from interesting speculation to serious historical investigation. If Clara Elena had found artifacts while digging the well, those objects might still exist somewhere on our property, or might indicate the presence of additional buried materials. "There's something else," Dr. Morales said, referring to her tablet. "Computer. The geological survey data shows several anomalies in the soil around your well that are consistent with buried structures or large metal objects. The pattern suggests that there may be substantial materials below the current depth of the well shaft." She showed us false color images that revealed density variations in the soil surrounding the Esperanza well, even to our untrained eyes. It was clear that something was creating different patterns in the subsurface geology, something that didn't match the natural rock and soil formations of the surrounding area. "I'd like to propose a phased investigation," Dr. Morales continued. "We would begin with detailed ground-penetrating radar mapping of the area around the well, followed by historical research to correlate our findings with documented Sierra transport activities. If the initial investigation reveals evidence of significant historical activity, we would proceed to careful excavation with full documentation and professional archaeological methods." The timeline she proposed was aggressive but manageable. The initial radar mapping could be completed within 2 weeks, providing preliminary results without disrupting our emergency irrigation repairs. If the results justified further investigation, the excavation phase could begin in October after our harvest season, minimizing interference with our agricultural operations. James and I exchanged glances, both recognizing that Dr. Morales' proposal represented our best hope for generating the funding we needed to save Moonrise Valley Ranch. The federal grant money would cover our immediate crisis, and the possibility of discovering something historically significant could transform our property from a struggling agricultural operation into a valuable historical and educational destination. "Dr. Morales," I said, making the decision that would change our families' destiny, "we'd like to proceed with your investigation. When can you begin?" "I can have my equipment here by the end of the week," she replied, her excitement evident despite her professional demeanor. "I'll coordinate with your irrigation repairs to ensure we don't interfere with your emergency operations. But I want to be clear about something. If we do discover significant artifacts, this investigation could attract considerable attention from historians, archaeologists, and potentially treasure hunters. You'll need to be prepared for the possibility that your quiet ranch might become a very public place." The warning about public attention was concerning, but our immediate survival took priority over privacy considerations. We agreed to proceed with the investigation, and Dr. Morales began explaining the technical details of the radar mapping process and the documentation requirements for federal grant compliance. As we concluded the meeting, and Dr. Morales prepared to return to Sacramento to organize her equipment and team, I felt a combination of hope and apprehension that had replaced the despair that had dominated our family for months. We were still facing the same financial crisis, the same equipment failures, and the same agonizing decisions about Mom's care and our ranch's future. But for the first time since the crisis began, we had a potential source of assistance that didn't require selling our heritage or abandoning everything our ancestors had built. Sophia, who had been quiet during most of the meeting, approached me as Dr. Morales was loading her equipment back into her SUV. "Mom, do you really think there might be treasure buried under the Esperanza well?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I replied honestly, "but I think Clara Elena would approve of us investigating every possibility to save the ranch. She faced impossible odds when she claimed this land, and she never gave up looking for solutions." As Dr. Morales drove away, leaving dust clouds, in the still August air, stood beside the dry Esperanza well and wondered what secrets it might be hiding beneath its ancient stone walls. The well that had provided hope and sustenance for 6 generations of our family was about to reveal whether its greatest gifts were in the past or still waiting to be discovered. Dr. Morales returned to Moonrise Valley Ranch on September 3rd, with a team of 3 graduate students and a truck full of sophisticated archaeological equipment that looked more like military technology than historical research tools. The ground-penetrating radar unit alone was the size of a small car, equipped with multiple sensor arrays and computer systems that could create detailed 3-dimensional images of subsurface structures up to 30 feet underground. Her team worked with military precision, establishing a grid pattern around the Esperanza well and methodically scanning every square foot of the surrounding area. The process was fascinating to watch. They would slowly push the radar unit across the ground, while computer screens displayed real-time images of soil density, metal objects, and structural anomalies buried far below the surface. "What you're seeing here," Dr. Morales explained as we watched the radar operators work, "are density variations that indicate the presence of non-natural materials. This dark area suggests a large metal object approximately 15 feet below the current bottom of your well. The rectangular shapes around it appear to be wooden structures that have partially decomposed, but still maintain enough density to show up on our scans." The images on the computer screen were difficult for us to interpret, but Dr. Morales and her team were clearly seeing patterns that excited them enormously. They spent 3 days mapping the area around the well, discovering what appeared to be an extensive network of buried structures that extended in all directions from the stone-lined shaft. "This is extraordinary," announced Dr. Marcus Chun, a graduate student from UC Berkeley who specialized in gold rush archaeology. "The subsurface architecture suggests this wasn't just a way station, it was a major logistics hub with multiple buildings, storage areas, and what appears to be a large coach maintenance facility." The radar mapping revealed the outline of buildings that had been constructed around the well, probably in the 1860s, and then deliberately buried or allowed to be covered by natural soil accumulation. Most intriguingly, the scans showed what appeared to be a large wheeled vehicle positioned vertically in the well shaft itself, as if it had been lowered deliberately into the stone-lined chamber. "Based on the dimensions and configuration," Dr. Morales said, studying the detailed radar images, "this appears to be a Concorde stagecoach that was placed in the well intentionally rather than falling in by accident. The positioning suggests that someone took considerable effort to lower it carefully into position and then cover it with soil and debris." The implications were staggering. If a complete stagecoach had been deliberately hidden in our well, it could only mean that someone had been trying to conceal valuable cargo from bandits or claim jumpers. The historical records Dr. Morales had shown us indicated that Sierra Transport's missing shipment had disappeared in exactly this area during. Mom, who had been sitting quietly throughout the presentation, suddenly spoke up with unexpected clarity. "Clara Elena wrote about finding strange objects when she was digging the well. I remember reading about metal pieces and old leather that she couldn't identify." This was news to all of us. Mom's memory had been so unreliable lately that we weren't sure whether to trust this recollection. But Dr. Morales immediately became very interested. "Do you still have Clara Elena's journals?" she asked. James and I faced a difficult decision. Excavation would be far more disruptive to our ranch operations than radar mapping, requiring heavy equipment, large crews, and potentially weeks of intensive digging that would interfere with our ongoing agricultural activities. But the possibility of discovering the missing Sierra transport treasure was too significant to ignore, especially given our desperate financial situation. How long would the excavation take? I asked, trying to balance historical significance against practical concerns about our fall harvest and continuing irrigation system repairs. If we work carefully to preserve the integrity of any artifacts we discover, probably 4 to 6 weeks, Dr. Chen replied. We'll need to excavate the well shaft systematically, documenting everything in its original position before removing any objects. If there really is a stagecoach down there with its original cargo intact, this could be the archaeological find of the century. We agreed to proceed with the excavation, and Dr. Morales immediately began organizing the massive logistical effort required for a major archaeological dig. Within a week, our quiet ranch was transformed into a bustling research site with graduate students, professional archaeologists, photographers, conservators, and security personnel working around the clock to uncover whatever secrets lay buried beneath the Esperanza well. The excavation began on September 12th. With the careful removal of the wooden cover that had sealed the well for over 40 years. As the ancient boards were lifted away, we could see down into the stone-lined shaft that Clara Elena had constructed with such care and precision 155 years earlier. The morning sunlight illuminated the upper portions of the well walls, revealing the masterful stonework that had withstood decades of weather and seismic activity without any signs of structural failure. Your ancestor was an exceptional engineer, commented Dr. Sarah Peterson, a specialist in 19th century construction techniques, who had joined the excavation team. The precision of these stone joints and the quality of the mortar work are remarkable for frontier construction. She clearly understood principles of structural engineering that were advanced for her time and circumstances. The excavation proceeded, slowly and methodically, with every shovelful of soil being carefully sifted for artifacts and every layer being photographed and documented before removal. As the team worked deeper into the well shaft, they began discovering objects that confirmed the historical significance of the site. At a depth of 8 feet, they found a collection of horseshoes, harness hardware, and iron tools that dated to the 1860s. At 12 feet, they discovered fragments of leather and cloth that appeared to be parts of luggage or cargo containers. At 15 feet, they found the first pieces of wood that clearly belonged to a large wheeled vehicle, painted boards with brass fittings that matched the construction techniques used by the abbot. Downing and Company of Concord, New Hampshire, the premier manufacturer of stagecoaches during the Gold Rush era. This is definitely a Concord coach, Dr. Morales announced excitedly, as more wooden components emerged from the soil. The construction details and brass fittings are absolutely characteristic of Abbott Downing workmanship, based on the serial numbers we're finding on the hardware. This coach was manufactured in 1867, making it exactly the right vintage for Sierra transport operations. As the excavation continued deeper into the well shaft, the excitement of the archaeological team became almost palpable. They were clearly discovering something extraordinary. But they maintained their scientific discipline, documenting every detail before proceeding to the next layer of soil and artifacts. At 18 feet below the surface of the well shaft and made the discovery that would transform our family's life forever. Preserved in the oxygen-poor environment at the bottom of the stone-lined chamber was an intact Concord stagecoach, positioned upright as if it had been carefully lowered into place and abandoned there for over 150 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Morales announced to the assembled team, her voice trembling with excitement, we have just uncovered what appears to be the missing Sierra transport stagecoach, and based on the historical records, potentially the most valuable treasure. Discovery in California archaeological history. The stagecoach was in remarkable condition, considering its age and burial circumstances. The dry environment and stable temperature of the well had preserved the wooden body, leather fittings, and even paint details that would normally have deteriorated decades ago. But more importantly, The coach appeared to be fully loaded with cargo that had remained undisturbed since the day it was hidden. The rear cargo compartment contained several wooden chests bound with iron straps, their locks still intact after 156 years underground. The passenger compartment held leather satchels, document cases, and what appeared to be personal belongings of travelers who had been aboard the coach when it disappeared. Most intriguingly, beneath the driver's seat was a large iron strongbox that clearly contained substantial weight and bore the markings of the Sierra Transport Company. "We need specialized equipment to lift these artifacts safely," Dr. Morales explained as the team worked to stabilize and document the discovery. "The strongbox alone probably weighs over 300 pounds, and we can't risk damaging it or its contents by attempting to move it with improper tools." The process of extracting the Stagecoach and its cargo required another week of careful work. Crane was brought in to lift the major components, while conservators worked to stabilize leather and wooden artifacts that might deteriorate. Rapidly once exposed to air and light, every step was documented with photographs and detailed measurements, creating a permanent record of exactly how the artifacts had been positioned and preserved. On September 24, 2024, the strongbox was finally opened in a specially constructed conservation laboratory that had been established in our ranch's main barn. The event was witnessed by representatives from the California State Historical Society, the Sierra Nevada Gold Rush Museum, federal archaeology officials, and our entire family. Dr. Morales used specialized tools to carefully remove the corroded lock mechanism without damaging the strongbox itself. As the heavy iron lid was lifted for the first time in over 150 years, revealing the contents that had been hidden in our well since 1868, the assembled crowd fell silent in amazement. The strongbox contained exactly what the historical records had suggested: the missing Sierra Transport treasure shipment worth $2.3 million in 1868 currency. Row upon row of gold double eagles gleamed in the artificial light, their surfaces still bright after a century and a half in darkness. Silver ingots bearing the stamps of various California mines were stacked beneath the gold coins, and leather pouches contained additional precious metals and gemstones that represented the accumulated wealth of dozens of successful mining operations. The preliminary count indicates 3,847 gold double eagles, each with a face value of $20 but a modern collector value averaging $24,000 due to their rarity and historical significance, announced Dr. Patricia Williams, a numismatic specialist, who had been brought in to evaluate the coins. The total value of the gold alone exceeds $92 million at current market prices, but the discovery went far beyond monetary value. The cargo compartments contained historical documents, maps, and correspondence that provided unprecedented insight into gold rush era, transportation networks, and mining operations. Business records, legal documents, and personal letters created a time capsule that illuminated aspects of 1860s California, life that historians had never been able to study before. Most significantly for our family, the documents included detailed records of Sierra transport operations and explained exactly how the treasure had ended up buried in our well. According to a leather-bound journal kept by the Stagecoach driver, a man named William Garrett, the coach had been attacked by bandits near Bakersfield on October 15, 1868. Garrett and his guard had escaped with the coach, but both had been wounded during the robbery attempt. Realizing they were being pursued and might not survive their injuries, Garrett and the guard had made the desperate decision to hide the treasure at the secret way station rather than risk it falling into the hands of the bandits. Garrett's journal described lowering the coach into the well using pulleys and ropes, then covering it with soil and debris to conceal any evidence of its presence. The final entry in Garrett's journal is particularly poignant. Dr. Morales read, "To our assembled family," he writes, "may God forgive us for abandoning our duty, but the treasure will be safer here than in bandit hands. Perhaps someday an honest person will find what we could not deliver and put it to good use." The legal implications of the discovery were complex, but ultimately favorable to our family. Under California state law and federal statutes governing Archaeological discoveries on private property, we retained ownership of the treasure while gaining access to substantial historical preservation funding and educational grants. The state of Nevada agreed to purchase a representative selection of the coins for museum display at full market value, providing immediate financial relief while allowing us to retain the majority of the discovery. The transformation of our financial situation was immediate and dramatic. The initial sale of 20% of the gold coins to the State Museum generated $18.4 million, more than enough to address all of our immediate crises and establish substantial reserves for future ranch operations. The remaining treasure, conservatively valued at over $74 million, created a family endowment that would ensure Moonrise Valley Ranch could continue operating for generations while expanding its role as an educational and historical destination. But, perhaps more importantly, the discovery reconnected our family to the historical significance of our land and our ancestors' vision. Clara Elena had unknowingly built her well on a site where desperate men had hidden a fortune, trusting that someday an honest person will find what we could not deliver and put it to good use. Her descendant had indeed found the treasure, and we were determined to use it exactly as William Garrett had hoped. The publicity surrounding the discovery attracted international attention, transforming our ranch from a struggling agricultural operation into one of California's premier historical destinations. We established the Clara Elena Rodriguez Foundation for Agricultural Education, using a portion of the treasure to provide scholarships and grants for young people pursuing careers in sustainable farming throughout the American West. The Esperanza was fully restored and became the centerpiece of an expanded educational center that attracted thousands of visitors annually. School groups regularly toured the site, learning about both gold rush history and modern sustainable agriculture. The Stagecoach itself was restored and displayed in a specially constructed museum building, along with the treasure and historical documents that told the complete story of the Sierra transport mystery. Most gratifyingly, the discovery provided resources for Mom's medical care that allowed her to remain comfortable and surrounded by family throughout the progression of her illness. We were able to hire the best specialists and provide treatments that maintained her quality of life while giving us precious additional time to benefit from her wisdom and experience. Inspired by the historical research that had led to the discovery, decided to pursue a double major in archaeology and agricultural science, planning to return to the ranch with expertise that would help preserve both its historical significance and its agricultural productivity. The treasure that had secured our financial future had also strengthened the connection between past and future that had always defined our family's relationship with the land. 2 years after the discovery, as I stood beside the restored Esperanza, while watching Sophia lead a group of students on an educational tour, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us from the brink of losing everything to becoming stewards of one of California's most significant historical sites. The drought that had threatened to destroy us had led to the investigation that revealed our greatest treasure. The crisis that had nearly broken our family had ultimately strengthened our connection to both our heritage and our future. Clara Elena's well had provided hope and abundance for 6 generations, just as she had intended when she named it Esperanza. But its greatest gift hadn't been the water it provided for a century, or even the treasure it concealed for 156 years. Its greatest gift was the lesson it taught about perseverance, faith, and the belief that solutions can be found even in the most impossible circumstances, if you're willing to dig deep enough and never give up hope. The treasure from the Sierra transport Stagecoach had saved Moonrise Valley Ranch, but the real wealth of our land had always been visible to those who knew how to look for it, in the resilience that had sustained us through multiple crises, in the innovation that had allowed us to adapt to changing conditions in the community, connections that had supported our family through generations of challenge and change, and in the values that had guided our stewardship from Clara Elena's time to our own, as the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada mountains, painting our valley in the golden light that had inspired its name. I understood that we were simply one chapter in a continuing story that would extend far beyond our individual lives. The discovery had transformed our circumstances, but it had also deepened our responsibility to preserve both the land and the values that Clara Elena had established when she first claimed this remote piece of California with nothing but determination and an unshakable belief in the possibility of creating something lasting and meaningful. The Esperanza had kept its promise, providing hope and abundance for generations yet to come. In finding the treasure that saved our ranch, we had also discovered the deeper truth that Clara Elena had understood from the beginning, that the real wealth of any land lies not in what can be taken from it, but in what can be built upon it and passed forward to those who will come after us.